Deep in the middle of the NHL offseason, the Boston Bruins still have a few things they need to take care of before the start of training camp.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Tuesday, July 30th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com and add a big win to your summer bucket list. Speaking of the summer, a quick programming note. We're going to be going at a bit of a reduced schedule over the next few weeks. You would have noticed, perhaps, if you're an everydayer, that there was no episode on Monday. I'm going to do one more this week before going on vacation. And then beginning on August, 9th, we'll be going 3, maybe 4 episodes a week through to the beginning of training camp. And speaking of training camp, we're talking today about 3 things the Bruins still need to do before training camp begins, after what has been already a pretty eventful offseason. Before we dive into that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts and dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. If you are new to the podcast, I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan. I've been following and covering this team for various outlets for about 20 years. Worked for 5 years as a full-time news editor at The Score, and have been hosting this podcast since 2019. And here we are at this current moment. The Bruins have 3 things remaining on, at least on their off-season to-do list. Of course, the biggie is re-signing Jeremy Swayman. Now, there's been a bunch of restricted free agent signings over the past few days. Brock Faber signed a monster 8-year, $68 million contract with the Wild. Martin Necas signed a 2-year deal with Carolina the other day. The Boston Bruins needing to get in on this action by re-signing franchise goaltender Jeremy Swayman. He's a restricted free agent. He's at the end of his current deal, which was arbitrated last summer in what was a bit of a personal thing for Jeremy Swayman, as a player in arbitration has to hear all the things that the team believes are some deficiencies or reasons why he should not be paid as much as he is looking for. It's just part of the business. Thankfully, both sides were reluctant to go to arbitration this summer. And after the trade of Linus Ullmark to the Ottawa Senators, the 25-year-old goalie is the clear franchise number 1 moving forward, but without a deal signed as training camp approaches. It will begin on September 18th. Now, of course, as I mentioned, last season, he was awarded a 1-year deal worth a very team-friendly $3.475. There's reports out there that he's pushing for upwards of $9 million. The Bruins have about 8.6 in available cap space. We'll touch on that later on when we discuss some other needs that the Bruins have to address. But according to Puckpedia, right now the Bruins have about $8.64 million in available cap space, with 22 of 23 roster spots currently occupied. There could be some movement there as guys are sent down to the AHL. Among those 23 players includes Patrick Brown, Vinny Lettieri, So there is room for movement there, but the biggie to be filled is Jeremy Swayman. You do not want to go into the season with Joonas Korpisalo and Brandon Bussi as your 1-2. Now, as a restricted free agent, Swayman has until December 1st to reach an agreement, or he's ineligible to play for the remainder of the season. I'm not suggesting by any stretch that it's going to get to that point, but that's the deadline. That's what is in place. Again, there's speculation that a long-term deal could carry an average annual value of around $8 to $9 million. If it's over that 8.64, the Bruins will have to make some cost-cutting moves or place a player on long-term injured reserve in order to stay cap compliant. Teams can go, I believe, 10% over the cap ceiling, which is currently set at $88 million up until opening night. But at that point, you have to be cap compliant. The last situation that's kind of reminiscent was William Nylander and the Toronto Maple Leafs back in 2018. That went until the final hour as Nylander signed right before that December 1st deadline, and it did affect his performance that season. That's the ultimate pressure point, but again, it's not expected to get to that point. A resolution could come any day, really. It could come out of the blue, could come as early as September. Hopefully, Swayman will sign a 7-year deal, maybe worth, it would be great to get him in the 7s, but as close to 8 as possible. But the longer this drags on, the more speculation will rise that he is prone to an offer sheet, or there's unnecessary tension here heading into this upcoming season. Now, we're going to touch on Joonas Korpisalo later on in the podcast, but according to The Athletic, the Bruins have, with Korpisalo and Swayman, the 7th ranked goaltending tandem in the NHL. They write, the all-world hugging goalie tandem of Swayman and Ullmark had to end at some point thanks to the pesky salary cap, and Swayman's ascension over the last 2 years gave the Bruins the confidence to trade the 2023 Vezina winner. Swayman is 5 years younger than Ullmark, and getting Korpisalo back in the deal gives Boston a solid, albeit diminished, tandem for the next several years. Few organizations have developed goalies at a more impressive rate, so it's safe to assume Boston will continue to thrive in the crease. So that's pretty encouraging. The Swayman extension, they write, will get done one way or another, but it certainly hasn't seemed like smooth sailing so far. He won't come cheap, but he's unlikely to have the leverage to force the Bruins into something truly regrettable. Korpisalo deal for 4 more years. Well, we'll touch on that later on in the podcast. And coming up, we'll discuss the Bruins' continuing needs on the wing. We'll discuss scoring options here as the podcast continues. FanDuel is giving customers an opportunity to cash in all summer long with some pretty cool boosts and bonuses daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Even though NBA, NHL are off, there's still the Olympics going on. There's WNBA action. There's Major League Baseball. And FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. Head over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most of your summer. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And right now you can go over there and put some money on the Boston Red Sox. Their next game against the Seattle Mariners, the over-under is set at 10 runs. So go over to FanDuel, place your bets, and get those daily boosts. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And speaking of YouTube, there's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories, all the latest news, opinions, and analysis from across the Locked On universe. Check it out 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Now, with the departures of Jake DeBrusk, Danton Heinen, James Van Riemsdyk remains unsigned as well. The Bruins have some holes to fill on the wings. They've attempted to do that by adding Max Jones, by adding Riley Tufte, perhaps. Elias Lindholm at center allows Pavel Zacha to play on the wing. Perhaps Morgan Geekie can play on the wing as well. But there's still some real questions about Boston's ability to score, especially on the wings. The right side in particular is prone to some weakness there. On the left side, you have Brad Marchand, Pavel Zacha, Trent Frederick. On the right side, though, it's David Pastrnak, Morgan Geekie. And yes, you are hoping for a breakout performance from Fabian Lysell. And the best case is that he steps up, he steps in, and he becomes a viable option as a scoring winger for the Boston Bruins. Now, that is a bit of a big ask, considering he hasn't played at the NHL level, and there's just a lot of pressure to put on a young guy. Now, as a first-round pick, you would expect that he would be able to rise to that task, but there's a very real possibility that he won't be able to. So who else could the Bruins sign? Now, again, I'm fully on board with giving Fabian Lysell a shot. I hope that he can jump up and sign or become a contributing member to the Boston Bruins. But to expect him to step up in the top six, play alongside Coyle and Marchand, and be an effective contributor night in and night out, it might be a tough ask. All rookies, or most rookies anyways, go through some ups and downs. So what should the Bruins do? Well, I think, and I believe, they should be looking to add either via free agency or at least a PTO, someone who can come in and possibly contribute here in training camp, either on a PTO or on a contract, depending on if there's any money left over from after Jeremy Swayman has resigned. Obviously, that's the big thing we need to get done. We need to get him signed. But at the same time, if there's money left over, then it's imperative that the Bruins find someone to come in, not only maybe to take that job, but to provide some internal competition. You don't want to just come in and say you have the job, take it, run with it. The Bruins could bring somebody in to at least provide some internal competition for Lysell and also Georgi Merkulov. Now, there are some options on the right wing that the Bruins could entertain here as the summer goes on, if they want to at least extend a PTO to someone like, let's say, Kyler Yamamoto, who's 25 years old, coming off a $1.5 million deal with the Seattle Kraken. Not, super effective for them, but still a guy with some upside. There's also Denis Gurianov, who was a first-round pick of the Dallas Stars back in 2015, 12th overall. He could provide some, again, insurance for the Boston Bruins. He did have 12 goals and 30 points in 55 games for the Stars just a few years ago. There's also Filip Zadina, who's available. Alex Nylander was an option. He was a guy that was signed to a two-way contract by the Toronto Maple Leafs, joining the aforementioned William, his brother, in that organization. Maybe they go a bit older and see if Blake Wheeler wants to come in. But if they're adding some speed, or wanting to add some speed anyways, then that's probably not the way to go. There are some restricted free agents that they could look at, but maybe via trade. Peyton Krebs appears to be available in Buffalo, but that's not likely something that they will entertain. So I think, Yamamoto, maybe Filip Zadina is a guy that you could float as a potential, at least, PTO. Why do I say Filip Zadina? Yes, he hasn't exactly hit in the NHL after being drafted pretty highly by the Detroit Red Wings. But you look at that Czech connection in Boston, you look at David Pastrnak, Pavel Zacha, how they have thrived. Perhaps he could come in and just benefit from being around those guys, those countrymen, those players who, could very well help to get the best out of him. I know there's already reports of potential PTOs for this guy around the league. I've seen articles about him maybe signing one with Calgary. His career has been somewhat disappointing. 6th overall selection in 2018, but he has a ton of talent, still relatively young. Bringing him into camp, potentially giving him a short-term deal could turn out to be a pretty nice decision for the Boston Bruins. Same with Yamamoto. Look, the Bruins already went back to the 2016 draft and signed Jones, Tufte, guys who were drafted late in the first round there. It's a smart move to invest in guys who were once highly touted and see if they could pop in your system and surrounded by the right players. So Zadina, Yamamoto, those are guys that I'm looking at as potential, at least PTOs for the Boston Bruins. Yes, we want Lysell to pop as Boston's draft pick, homegrown talent, but it's always good to have at least some insurance there in case it doesn't work out. And also to have that internal competition in camp to push Lysell to be his best and not to have him assume that he's going to be handed an opening night roster spot. So that's a big to-do list still on Don Sweeney's plate. I believe he needs to grab someone who could at least push the young wingers in Boston to be at their very best. What's the other thing on Boston's to-do list? Well, we'll talk about that here as the podcast continues. Make no mistake, Boston Bruins fans, one of the reasons why the Bruins were so good last season was because of the goaltending tandem of Linus Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman. And as good as Swayman was in the playoffs, part of that could have been because he had a pretty even split with Ullmark in net and was well rested. With a tandem of Swayman and Korpisalo coming into this season, it's going to be a heavier load for Korpisalo. He ranked 97th out of 98 goalies in goals saved above expected, according to Money Puck last season. And he admitted, last year was a tough year for everyone in Ottawa. Changes in the GM, the owner, the coaches. It's a long season when it goes that way. And for him individually, the whole team, they underperformed. He's saying it's behind him. He looks back with some things to learn. And now it's a nice time to look forward and have a great opportunity with Boston. And he could not be more excited, he said. Now, part of that will be up to goalie Bob Essensa to work his magic. Korpisalo is 30 years old. He's going to be around for 4 more seasons with a cap hit of $3 million per season, $1 million being retained by the Ottawa Senators. It's a more expensive backup goalie option than we expected. The whole idea of trading Ullmark, we thought, was to shed that cap space and use that to shore up the lineup elsewhere. Would have been nice to have that $3 million to use on a winger. But I guess they didn't really want to throw a true rookie in Brandon Bussey into big role with the Bruins, therefore absorbing Korpisalo's contract to get that first round pick. Don Sweeney around the NHL draft said they feel comfortable with Korpisalo as a complement and a guy that can push. They feel there's more ground for him to get back to when he played his best hockey. A couple seasons ago with Columbus and LA, he was pretty good. And that was one of the reasons why Ottawa committed that 5 years and $20 million. Similar to situation to when Yaroslav Halak came onto the team and played with Tuukka Rask. They feel comfortable in terms of stylistically, the competitiveness of the goalie, and goalie Bob doing his work. Korpisalo comes in as an experienced backup goalie with nearly 300 games of NHL experience. Again, he had a .913 save percentage in 28 games with Columbus a couple of seasons ago, .921 in 11 games with the Kings, and he does have a .922 career save percentage in 15 playoff games with Columbus and LA. That $3 million could be pretty expensive and could be regrettable, but it could be a nice insurance policy in case Swayman has some growing pains as he grows into the franchise goalie, takes on significantly more games, maybe upwards of 60 after never playing more than 44. And it's incumbent on the Boston Bruins to get Korpisalo into Boston quickly, get him acclimated with goalie Bob, get them working together, get them forming a solid relationship so that he can get the most out of him. Again, the Bruins did not thrive last season because they blew the doors off the opposition offensively, or because they were especially great defensively. This team regularly gave up more shots and attempts than the opposition. It was Ullmark and Swayman who stood there and helped keep the Bruins in games that perhaps they wouldn't have been in otherwise. So that's what we need. We need to sign Swayman. We need to get Joonas Korpisalo up to speed in terms of goalie Bob's system, and that relationship between those two goalies. We're not expecting them to be, besties like Swayman and Ullmark were, but at least a functioning tandem who supports each other and gets the most out of each other. And then, of course, finding room for a winger, whether via PTO and or a contract signed with leftover money. Maybe they're waiting, or James Van Riemsdyk is waiting for that to be sorted out. The Bruins are saying, hang tight, we'll give you another deal. You were pretty good for us last season. Faltered a bit down the stretch, but I believe that was due to illness. Or maybe they're looking at Zadina, Yamamoto, Nylander's off the table. So is Daniel Sprong. But these are some young guys with upside that I would like to see, at least at training camp, given an opportunity to push the young guys and maybe grab a roster spot. All right, that's it for today's episode, my friends. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Thank you so much for those of you who subscribe. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. And we'll be back in 2 days to discuss the 1 through 32 power rankings as voted on by fellow Locked On hosts. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Enjoy the Olympics. Get outside. And we'll talk to you here soon again on Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.